So we're going to talk about an idea that one of my composition teachers taught me called gathering your materials. That's what he called it, at least. How can you think of all the different ideas that you're going to use in a piece of music if you're basing them off of one melody? Stay with me. I'm Isaac Schanno Johnson. If you don't know me, I'm a musician, composer, producer, and I make videos about all that fun stuff, music composition, music production. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to see videos like this in the future. Okay, so gathering your materials. What does this mean? So I had a teacher in college that would tell me to do this when I was writing a string quartet. I had an idea. It was 4 measures. It wasn't very long. It wasn't very complicated. And it was based off of the octatonic scale, which, if you don't know, is an 8-note scale alternating whole half, whole half, whole half, or half, whole half, whole steps and half steps. I showed him the idea, and that's the first thing he said to do, was gather your materials. So what does that mean? That means thinking of all the different variations of a melody that you can before you write a piece of music. Plan out the structure of the piece of music. Now, if you've never done this before, it seems weird and seems a little cerebral and a little computational and a little analytic, right? It's not specifically creative, but you're kind of figuring out what you want to do in a piece of music. Now, I don't do this every time I write a piece of music. That would be so exhausting if I did. But being able to do this can help you write a lot better music. So basically, you're trying to vary your one idea as much as you can. You can do this in a bunch of different ways musically, right? I mean, in an infinite number of ways can you vary it, but there are some ways I like to do in a kind of systematic and organized way so that I can make sure that I have a solid number of variations when I'm done. First way that you can vary it is play it in different modes and scales. So in this, I would include Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. Play it in all those modes. Play it in whole tone. Play it in symmetrical diminished or octatonic, same thing. Play it in the 2 different versions of those scales, right? Whole half versus half whole. Play it in a pentatonic scale. Play it in the different modes of the harmonic minor scale. Play it in the different modes of the melodic minor scale. Basically, what you want to do is think of as many different scales as you know and play it using those. You might have to change the notes. You might have to change the intervals a little bit, but try and play it in whatever scales you can think of to play it in. Next thing is you can take the melody and flip it upside down and backwards. So this in music, it's called the retrograde is backwards, inversion is upside down, and retrograde inversion is upside down and backwards. So what you can do is literally like play it backwards in your sheet music. And then inversion is kind of a little more difficult because you need to invert all of the intervals. So let's say your melody starts and then starts on C and goes up a fourth to F. If you were to invert that, it would start on C and go down a fourth to G. So then you do that for the rest of the piece. See what that sounds like. Now, most of the time, you'll find one of those that sounds good. The other 2 might not. But you want to gather the different materials that you have. And it can often be fun to hear what it sounds like played in these different ways and played with these different rhythms and different intervals, kind of. And it can often be fun to hear it played in these different ways, backwards, upside down, and backward. Another thing you can do is take motifs from your melody. Now, a motif is kind of like a short, small, few note figure from a piece of music. So in Happy Birthday, a motif would be the first 4 notes. Ba-da-da-da. That's kind of a motif from Happy Birthday. So you could take that, change it, move it up the scale, repeat it over and over again, right? If you took Happy Birthday, you could have dun da 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 dun da 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 da. That's using that same motif and repeating it, and suddenly have this new idea, this new musical idea that you didn't have before. And I'm a really big fan of this because it can create ideas that are related to each other, but don't necessarily sound boring or like the exact same thing. So if you take something like 4 notes, 5 notes, 6 notes or something, that way you can create this other idea from this existing idea you already have in your piece of music, but you don't have to worry about it getting too boring or too similar to stuff that you already have. Often you can find multiple motifs in a piece of music. If you have a melody, you can probably find a couple different motifs within it that you can do this with. See what all of them sound like, right? You could take a motif and then invert it and then try and make another idea out of it. Now, it won't sound directly related. It won't sound like it's exactly the same thing, but it will have some resemblance to this other melody that you already have. Something else you can do that I really like doing with music is take a melody and build chords out of it. So let's say you have a melody that is A, G sharp, E, F sharp. That's your melody. And you take that, play that as a chord. A, G sharp, F sharp, E is the total notes. Now that might not sound exactly like a great chord. It'll sound like a cluster. But if you play it F sharp at the bottom, then A, then up to E and up to G sharp, now you suddenly have an F sharp minor 9 chord basically without a fifth. And that's a chord you could use. You could definitely use that chord. You could shift it all over the place. Now, this isn't going to sound exactly related. It's not going to sound exactly like the melody, but it can be a starting point to give you other ideas. And in some sense, I do think you can hear some of these relationships, especially if they are specific to a song, right? If you have a song that plays A, E, B, F sharp, all fifths going up, and you play that as a chord, that's definitely going to sound related because you're going to be able to hear that the melody is the same thing as this stack of notes that are played together. It won't sound exactly related, but it'll sound similar. It'll sound like it comes from the same idea, the same music as this other piece of music that you have. I do think if you get really good at ear training, you can start to hear this, especially if you start to listen to music in this way. Try and hear if stuff is related. For example, my album Expanding an Electric Symphony, I basically do this with every single song. So the first song, Movement 1, Expanding, I thought of these two melodies and I wanted to use them and use the material of that one song as much as I could for the rest of the music. Now, some of them don't sound exactly the same, but if you were to take them and either slow them down or speed them up or play them in a slightly different way, you could very easily hear how two things in that are related. And I do this for the entire album. That's kind of the idea of the whole album, because I like that it can give your music this like cohesive sound musically, where not just the sounds themselves are the same, right? If you're making electronic music, you could literally just use the same sounds, which is also what I did in Expanding, but it gives it not just this sound where the instruments are the same, but it gives us this sound where the musical ideas are the same, right? So you have this idea that starts the first song and then comes back in one of the later songs, and you hear it kind of in the middle, and you hear something that kind of resembles it, sounds similar to it in the middle too, but you're not quite sure. It might be backwards, I don't know, but you then hear it at the end. Now, if you do this, it does take some planning to do all this stuff, and it takes a solid amount of thinking, and let's be honest, a solid amount of time to get all this stuff together, because you have to vary your melody like a whole bunch of different ways, and you have to like also sift through and find ones that you like and don't like and all of that stuff. But it can be a great way to make your music just a little bit more interesting, and I think honestly a little bit more fun to write, because then it becomes this like whole other world that you're creating where you're trying to make it all revolve around this one idea, but also it's kind of like a puzzle because you don't want it to sound boring. So it can be this fun idea to play with because it gives you these other ideas to mess around with, and it sort of creates this world of music where everything revolves around this one idea, right? It all focuses on this one melody. And another thing it does is it creates this almost puzzle type of writing, right? Where you're not just thinking of a whole bunch of ideas and using them. That can be fun. Use that in your writing, right? But it's this other style of writing where you want your music to focus on this one idea. And you want, by the time it's done, that idea is really familiar to the listener. How do you do that without just repeating this one idea over and over and over again? How do you do that? By making somebody familiar with this musical idea that they've never heard before. But you got to make them so familiar that by the end, it sounds like they're coming home, right? That's kind of the idea of what I tried to do with Expanding. Take a listen to it. listen to a couple of the different songs, hopefully you can hear that it's a lot of the same musical ideas. And this is how I started it. I started with those ideas, I gathered all my materials, and then I started writing. It can be a weird thing if you've never done it before, but trust me, it's a lot of fun. So that is it for this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something about music. And make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you did find it useful. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace.